Thank you. I am very flattered. I was just saying earlier that somehow every single panel that I've moderated is the 3 p.m. slot, and I gotta hand it to FounderMade. They're running 2 minutes early, so I love that. I've never seen that before. And I don't want to brag, but I think having the 3 p.m. slot means I'm gonna keep you guys awake, because I'm sure most of you are getting really tired right now. So, as it says on here, I work at Commerce Ventures. We are a venture capital firm. We invest in early stage startups. Sadly, we do not invest in brands, but what I do day in, day out is invest in tech startups that serve brands and retailers. We meet over 2,000 startups in a year, and I'm sure you guys, your heads are spinning. You're thinking about all the startups that you can use to solve different problems. Today, we've talked about Amazon, we talked about selling direct, we talked about building relationships with retailers, we talked about building relationships with bankers. It's a lot to do. It's super complicated. So on this panel, we are going to talk about how to maximize the efficiency of doing it all at the same time. So would love to bring up our panelists. We have Laura Kendrick to start she's the CMO of Cure Hydration. I'll let you introduce yourself.
Hello. I'm Laura Kendrick. I'm the CMO of Cure Hydration. Cure Hydration, for those of you that do not know, is a powdered electrolyte drink mix, better for you space. We are plant-based, vegan, no sugar added, and great tasting. Please try it, it's delicious. In my past life, I worked at Smarty Pants Vitamins. I was their first marketing hire. And I worked there for 9 years, all the way through the Unilever acquisition. I stayed on there for a year to kind of figure out, what does Unilever know that we do not? Like, newsflash, the answer is not a lot. That is where I came from. Prior to working at Smarty Pants Vitamins, I had a completely unrelated job. I was a talent agent at one of the main agencies down the street.
Wow, what a career. Do you have any samples here?
No, of course not.
Oh, you're killing me. All right. Next up, we have Matt, who is at PetMeds, CEO and president.
Hello, thank you. Anyone have pets here? Do they need medication? Probably eventually. Well, we could probably help you. Matt Hulett, CEO and president of PetMeds. We're a $300 million public company. And we do what we say. We do online pet medication. We also sell food and supplements and everything else that makes your pet healthy. Prior to this, I was the president of Rosetta Stone. I have a long career primarily of startups and late stage companies with a theme for me around turnaround. So if you have any of those kind of turnaround questions, happy to talk to you later at happy hour.
Awesome.
Because I'll need a drink after this.
Thank you. And last but not least, we have Dave Wardell, who is the former president and CEO of one of my favorite brands, Chubbies, although I don't wear it, but I've seen it around a lot.
Hey, we make stuff for you too.
Didn't know that, actually.
Yeah, matching, a lot of matching. Dave Wardell, great to be here. Appreciate you hosting. Looking forward to chatting with y'all. I was at Chubbies for about 9 years in the CFO, kind of COO role, and then eventually in the president role after we sold 2 solo brands and went public in 2021. Before that, PwC doing accounting and consulting, and while I was at Chubbies, I was running mostly finance and accounting, investor relations, that type of stuff, with little dives into strategic projects, operations, fulfillment, distribution, and that. One of those was a company called Loop Returns. We built that software with the founder there, Jonathan Poma, and then spun that out, and now that's powering a lot of the e-commerce industry's returns. So, and at this point, I left about a year ago, and I'm working on a new software startup with one of the Chubbies founders.
Which hopefully we can invest in one day.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you all so much for joining us. We have such a range of brands, so I'm really curious to kind of hear about each of your different opinions on some of the questions that we have. So as I was saying before, lots of things to do. So how do you just think about managing it all? When's the right time to go omni-channel? When's the right time to think about retail? When's the right time to think about Amazon? Who wants to kick it off?
I'm happy to. Honestly, I wish I had a better answer to this, but the answer is that it's different for all brands. Your vertical, where you are in the marketplace, all determines kind of the answer to this. So do I believe you need to be omni-channel? I do. I very firmly believe that. But do I think that you have to start on Amazon, or you have to start on D2C, or you have to start in retail? I do not. What I do think is interesting is that, to get into retail, and we did touch on this earlier, you often have to have some sort of precedent set up. So I do recommend usually starting on D2C and or Amazon, so you have some data to play with and data to give to retailers. But I do firmly believe you need to be in all three, and I do believe that it's, there is not one answer for every single brand, depending on, are you in the beauty space? Are you in the vitamin space? Are you in software? Are you, your vertical is going to determine this more so than honestly much else.
Yeah, sure. I'll jump in real quick. I agree, generally speaking. I mean, at this point, right, we were talking about omnichannel 3-4 years ago as being something that brands needed to figure out how to embrace. At this point, it's just table stakes. Like, you're a brand, which kind of inherently means you have 2, 3, 4 channels that you're selling in. You're trying to find the best distribution channels to get to your customers and your consumers. And so at that point, it's trying to match it up. You know, one of the things that I think about is, you know, what is your assortment like? Are you 1 to 2 SKUs, so you can't sit in a retail store and you really need to find distribution through wholesale channels? Are you a wide assortment? That's going to show up much better through your own website and through your own retail stores. Like, those are some of the considerations. What I will say about wholesale from an apparel, footwear, accessories world is it's way better if they are pulling you in than if you are pushing in. And so if you can create that 1 or 2 hero SKUs that get you in to the door, that the merchandiser, the buyer at a Nordstrom, REI, what have you, is pulling you in, that's going to set you up way better for long-term success. And you can kind of keep an upper hand for at least a little while before they start hosing you with chargebacks and cutting back your assortment at random times.
Just to pile on to that really quickly, because I think we're all agreeing that it's table stakes. It's where your customers are shopping and who are your customers. You know, the pet space, there's a difference between Farmer's Dog that's direct to consumer, that doesn't go into retail, and then there's Fresh Pet that's everywhere. I would say, though, just to pile on to your comment, I'm a big believer in starting online first to get testing out there and see if you get any kind of signal. It's easier to get other retailers, other distributors to actually pay attention to you if they can see how many likes you have on Instagram, how many followers you have, and how much traction you have. And some initial product market fit's really important. And then assessing how much capital you want to deploy and how much capital that you have and how much risk. I mean, I have a lot of friends who spent a lot of money in the retail channel and they weren't ready for it. So it's kind of product market fit, capital, and your appetite for risk as well.
And I also believe, like, I am a chief marketing officer. I am always thinking about the consumer, and I want to be meeting the consumer where they are. So the more touch points you have, the more likely you are to be able to meet that consumer where they are in that moment.
Makes total sense. Okay, so let's dive into that a little bit more. Driving into digital commerce to start with, data plays a huge part. You know, you're targeting on Instagram, you're targeting on Google. Is there a line where I guess it starts to get creepy, or how do you balance the efficiency of, you know, making huge audiences that you can target versus one-on-one personalization, which we can pretty much do with data these days, and especially in a world where privacy regulation is changing? How do you strike that balance?
I can take that just to jump into it. I mean, we all have the examples of the creepy personalization. We all have our individual ones. We don't have to get into it, where they don't know too much about you before you even know you had that issue. I would say this, that it comes with customer empathy and understanding who your customers are. For example, for us, we have like some of the largest data sets for pets, probably in the United States. We have 12 million pieces of data sets on pets, their age, their weight, and what medications they're on. And medication and weight and age is directly correlated to the lifespan of the pet. And so we are not sending out emails prior to the pet's death saying, here's a bereavement package for you. That would be inappropriate and not compassionate. And so I'd say, you know, first party data should be the most important thing that you have and covet, but you have to be really wise in how you use it and not to abuse it with your target groups.
Yeah, I don't know how I would feel if I got an Instagram ad for like my dog's funeral before he had passed away. So thanks for holding back on that one. Anyone else here?
I do also think that there is such thing as data paralysis, though. Like somebody had mentioned earlier, that we live in this world where, you know, we do have all of this first-party data, and it's very easy to not know where to start. You have all of this information. And so I think that from a company level, it is really, really important to know kind of what the direction is. What are we prioritizing? As a company, are we prioritizing revenue? Are we prioritizing profitability? Are we prioritizing brand awareness? Because all of these things, you know, play into you know, the decisions that we make.
Yeah, I would say from my CFO seat, I would typically work with the marketing leader looking at, hey, what are the data points around lifetime value, reorder rates, order economics, new versus repeat in particular, that we can define. I wouldn't get too much into the specific audiences. I think the thing that, you know, you need to trust that partner to do is to moderate their incursions into their existing repeat customers. There's only so many times you can show an ad, send an email, send a text message before people are going to unsubscribe. And so you have to be very careful and judicious about that. And I think that still comes back to like, what are your expectations for a customer coming back? Do you expect them to come back 30 days? Does it make a difference if you can get them to come back and purchase in 14 days? Do you see them have a lift off of the normal LTV curve? Those are the types of things that you have to look out for and tie back to, ultimately, in my opinion, profitability, but in the early days, cash flows, because as you heard, VCs aren't funding brands anymore. And so you have to find different ways of growing and being as efficient as possible with your capital and your cash. And ultimately, that's having a great understanding of like, what are your acquisition economics? And then what are the right signals in repeat that you can lift off of?
Spoken like a true CFO there. So a lot of acronyms, LTV, CAC. I'm sure everyone's kind of familiar with that. Would love to drive into the LTV component of it with you a little bit. Matt, PetMeds. Would love to hear a little bit more about subscription businesses. How do you kind of convert your customers from just one-time purchasers into that recurring revenue stream that VCs love?
One thing I would say is a lot of times I've been a part of early stage companies and I listen to people who have some level of scale and I'm like, man, I wish I had what they have. I'll tell you this, I'm running a $300 million company right now. It feels like a startup. I'm literally writing marketing surveys with the head of ChatGPT. I mean, my first day on the job, there was a paper printout of our financials. Now that is about as raw as you can get. So if you want any inspiration from today, remember this, you may suck, but you don't suck as bad as my first day on that job. So I'm about 2 years into the job, and now what we've done is completely transform the business into kind of a sleepy brand, and we still have work to do. Now 50% of our business is recurring. And we went from 0 in 2 years, and it's been a game changer. And so the obvious ones you're gonna hear is, oh, your lifetime value increases. It does. But the other things you start realizing is, your touch points with your customers increase, and they start telling you more things about what they want. Then they add more things that also have auto ship and subscription tied to it, and that compounds. And on the back end, from Dave's perspective, when you're looking at subscription businesses, you can also start doing predictive inventory analysis on what products are going to be the hot things and the things that you need to start stacking up. In fact, as we start expanding into food, we're starting to look at that as a test to figure out, okay, what do we want to warehouse? What do we want to do in third party? What do we want to do in drop ship? And understand some of those margin things that we want to influence over time. So for us, it's been an absolute game changer. The people who are not on auto ship, to be honest, they're not really that great of customers compared to the auto ship folks. So for us, subscription has been an absolute game changer.
Wow, that's a huge number, 50% on subscription. That's great.
And it should be higher. It should be 75%.
Wow.
It always should be higher.
Great. All right, let's move into collaborating with retail partners. So what are some novel techniques that you've seen to either get your foot in the door with a retail partner or to collaborate with them? A couple I've seen recently from startups are going to the direct-to-consumer's brand online, but then selecting an option to pick up that item in the store because you want it sooner from a retail partner. Or brands and retailers that are collaborating on marketing efforts and sharing the costs on marketing online. Retail media networks, everyone wants to be like Amazon and have a retail media network these days. Instacart, famously makes billions from that. So would love to kind of hear any techniques that you've heard for working with retail.
I think you nailed it. From my experience, the partnership with the retailers is twofold. One, data. Retailers are not particularly good at sharing data with you. So the more you can ask, the more you can push, and the more annoying you are, and the more data you can get, the more helpful it is to you. Also, the relationships and establishing the relationships with the retailers, because it's very important when you launch in a retailer that you have immediate visibility. You need, a shelf talker. You need literally anything that they are willing to split costs, give you up front to help your brand succeed. If you just go into a retailer and you have no marketing support, which often you can't just afford to paper the entire store with. If you don't get support from that retailer in helping you, you are not going to succeed in that retailer.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I was lucky enough to be at a brand where our product is bright and stands out on the floor from the stuff around us. So that was a big benefit, right? That was a sign itself, pulling the customer in. But there's nothing better than having a strong brand presence, strong first-party data that you have capture on, agreeing to send an email to direct people to a store. Think about what that costs you versus what you can gain, right? Measure, you should know on average how many unsubs you would get from a single individual email. It should not be a problem that you can send a message out on behalf of Nordstrom or Dick's Sporting Goods or CVS or whatever. It could be local, it could be national. You shouldn't balk at that because ultimately they're a partner. You're finding new customers through them. You're going in there because you trust that your product's going to show up well there, hopefully. Or if you're not, then you should revisit that decision. But I think people are a little too reticent to think of them as partners, and so I think you're spot on. Like they are your channel partner and another way to get a customer to come back to your site ultimately.
Great. Okay. Go ahead.
Can I just quickly? I got some advice on this from a relatively little-known direct-to-consumer e-commerce retailer. Starts with an A and ends with an N. And a friend of mine. He was like, I won't say who it is, but he runs a pretty big business there. I live in Seattle, so they're all kind of hanging out at the same places. And I said, hey, I'm just this small little person trying to do this. How do I compete with you? And he's like, you want me to tell you the playbook for my company? And he's like, yeah. He's like, well, we're all algorithmic based. And so the more you can do as a retailer or as a brand that gives more value to that whoever you're working with has massive edge over what we can do, because we're never going to see the little cracks and edges and little areas in which you can exploit. In particular, what I have found has worked really well whenever I tried to hit above my pay grade is give more value as like a test bed or a startup for that brand or that partner, and give them a lot of value and do it quickly. And the more you can help them, they will remember and they'll give you co-op, they'll give you rebates, and they'll find ways to help you. And I always thought that was interesting advice because we assume the giants are perfect and they know what they're doing. We all know that that's not true. And the more you can go in there with an entrepreneurial mindset, I think you'll find a lot of unlocks there.
I agree with that.
Speaking of that little brand, the next channel, marketplaces, or I guess as Ben David said, let's talk about Amazon. How do you decide when to go on Amazon? What types of brands is Amazon good for? Who does it make sense for? Who should stay away from Amazon?
This is one where we stayed away from it for a really long time, and I don't think that was wise. I think there's some brands where it's obvious, right? If you're a household consumables type thing, you just have to be on there. That's pretty obvious. I think there's a handful of categories like that where you can just use logic and apply it. But when it comes to fashion or apparel or stuff where you have a high bar for your brand, I think what you have to assess and think about is just the pure amount of traffic running through there. And why do you think it's going to be detrimental to your brand? Are you selling it at a lower price? No. Are you delivering it in an elongated timeline? No. And so what are those touch points that matter for your brand and how you're delivering and interacting with your consumer and your customer? And so that's what you ask yourself. I think people get a little too wrapped up in is Amazon going to compete with me? I think we've seen it, at least in the apparel space. No, they can't compete for crap. They're pretty much winding down a lot of that fashion and apparel business, at least. And so, get on there, look and find out what your searches are. Go talk to the person who's responsible for that category and bringing brands in. They will give you how much search traffic you have in there. You can apply your Google conversion rates, tick it up a little bit because there's much higher intent and higher conversion on there, and then see what you're missing and see if you're willing to walk away from that or if you're willing to invest half a person's time in managing that, and maybe look at Carbon 6 or whatever to help enable that.
It's more than half a person's time.
Anyone else?
Yeah, I mean, I have come from spaces where you have to be on Amazon. There's never been a question. Vitamins, they have to be on Amazon. Currently working in electrolyte drink mixes, has to be on Amazon. So I've never worked from a perspective where it's should we or should we not? The answer is you should, and you're late. Smarty Pants specifically was built on Amazon. And so that was the first channel we went into and the one that we had to make sure that we always won. Cure, it was not built on Amazon. That was actually built on D2C. So it's a little bit of a different perspective looking at it. But I do believe in Amazon. It is something I am pushing internally right now when we are ranking kind of the channels that we prioritize, and if we're out of inventory, who do we send to, who do we not send to? Like Amazon is our number one, because that is the best consumer experience. They get the product in 2 days. We get feedback where we can innovate and change and make our product better with the reviews. You can also do that on D2C, but not as quickly. And so we utilize Amazon, all the time, and it is a very, very important channel for us across the board.
JB, I think you said.
Yeah, one thing to add on really quick. People, Amazon values consistency and stability in the SKU base. It's something to keep in mind. So if you're a brand that has a lot of turnover and is highly seasonal, fashionable, like that stuff, that's what you want to retain on your site anyways. That's why you want that wider assortment to be bringing people, have a reason for them to come back to your site, your stores, what have you. That works really well. They don't care about that stuff. So it's not like a wholesaler that wants the unique new SKUs, the newness. They actually don't. And so you can find ways to retire stuff off your core site that maybe is seeing a declining sales trend, but take advantage of that. Like that's going to be a pretty good return on that asset that you've already developed the time to create.
That's a great little nugget. I had no idea how to beat the algorithm. I love it. Okay, so you've done everything. Those are great tips. You've done everything. Now you're omni-channel. Awesome. How do you manage all the new complications that come up? So managing your inventory across all channels, managing all your data across all your channels. Like, how do you get everything so it's organized and you can actually use it and it's functional?
I mean, I have the luxury right now of having a very small team. We are a company of 10. It is really easy to share information across a company of 10 people. Using Smarty Pants as the example, we were a company of 10 at one point, and we were definitely not when I left. And so it becomes harder and harder and harder. And so you invest in systems, really. As far as inventory management, like you hire great people. You really hire a great inventory team and a forecasting team who can read that crystal ball that frankly I cannot. Like from the inventory perspective, like I touched on it a little bit before, but you do have to prioritize. Like sometimes you're in a situation where you oversell, and honestly, it's a champagne problem. And so what do? You figure out like, okay, where do we send the existing inventory to? One, like if we're talking about omni-channel, I usually pull some back and we hold it for our subscription customers because that is guaranteed revenue. We know it's coming in. We know we can get rid of it. And then we send to Amazon because, to our point earlier, consistency. You cannot go out of stock on Amazon. And so because we're only in about 13,000 retail doors right now, it does allow us to prioritize, these two channels before we have to prioritize everything else. But really, like having a small team is why we're able to do this efficiently now. I'm not going to pretend it does not get significantly harder as the company gets bigger.
I may have like the weirdest answer, but like we're a $300 million business and we have one person that does inventory.
That's incredible.
And so I used to be like, let's build big teams and let's put the best software in. It's not true. It's going to get more complex for us because we're selling a lot more SKUs now. We have a limited SKU selection right now, which is the big one. We have a lot of minimal working capital needs and a lot of cash, which is a good thing to have.
Gosh, that sucks.
I know it sucks, but we're getting it very complicated very quickly. But I would say is if you're kind of thinking through systems and software, I would definitely try to find like a startup or someone who's a little bit newer, a newer stack, because I have the oldest stack on the planet that I'm running this business on right now, and I feel free because I can look at all the new software out there and go, I don't have to use some of these big things that like NetSuite and stuff. I can use different things. And so for me, I would just encourage everybody to think, okay, what's the simplest thing I could do with the least amount of capital deployed, and start from a position of one smart person, two smart person, three smart people, and then maybe stop and just see how many people melt before you hire the next person, and really don't try to overinvest in systems. Don't make a stupid decision where you have to migrate to a new system in a year, but you can do probably more than you think.
Yeah, I would say that I have never worked at a company that didn't do their forecasting and inventory in an Excel sheet.
We do.
Yeah, so do I.
Yeah, I mean, there's tools out there you can use to do your preseason buy planning, so you can see how your margins break down by category and stuff like that. When you have a wider assortment, that's really critical, so that everyone's on the same page, same expectations going in. But when it comes to in season, open to buy, replenishments, like that demand planning, all the decisions that go into like, do we discount this? Do we hold on to this? Do we move this between channels? That stuff still all happens in Excel. Definitely not even Google Sheets.
If you work with an expiring product, it does this for you.
Yeah. If only there was someone on stage building a software product to manage your
I
inventory.
wish
and
there was a
procurement.
way.
We'll talk about that later. But
You're not allowed to plug yourself.
just a light touch. I mean, inventory planners are worth their weight in gold, and everyone always invests too late in them. We did. You always see that. It's rare that you have someone, like, luckily we had one just rock star in-house who started out in merchandising, but he clearly had more of a skill set for planning. He's now senior director of planning, 7-8 years later, and we've built a team under him, mostly with a lot of people coming from buying at retail businesses, right? Because they have had to plan pretty complex businesses with a wide and differing array of SKUs. And so that tends to be a pretty good skill set. If you can't find the right direct inventory planning person, look for that like buyer who's looking to move out of some struggling, limping along behemoth retailer and move into a cool, fun new brand. Those people are worth their weight in gold, and kind of turn them loose. That said, omnichannel, until you're 5 stores, you can just manage that as an extension of your direct-to-consumer inventory. Wholesale, once you're hitting 15 million in revenue, probably, or a certain number of accounts, you gotta have a separate person for that. Like these channels, they're amazing, but they don't scale well at first. Like you have to overinvest. And there's a while where you're making that bet, and it's a little risky and it's dicey, and so you got to have a lot of conviction. It's the other reason not to do them all at the same time. So whenever you choose to do them, stagger them and invest in that inventory planning person.
Awesome. Last 2 minutes before we wrap it up and go to a question or two. So rapid fire, what's the one technology innovation that you think will be game changing in the next 2 to 3 years?
I mean, is anybody going to say anything other than AI?
That's the
AI?
I'd say AI for supply. So if you could marry your first party data with like external stuff, that'd be great for inventory planning. We're starting to do that because like seasonality for us is important for flea and tick season. So we're actually starting to use some AI with our inventory planning to start figuring out what to buy and when, because we're really not trying to carry any inventory. And that's, I think, going to be a game changer.
I was today years old when I learned that there's flea season. I had no idea. Yeah, and I also think AI is going to be very valuable for personalization. Everybody loves personalization. Lots and lots of brands have been moving toward it, and I think that it's going to continue to allow us to do that in a much more specific and broad way. That makes no sense, but specific to the person, broad to the channels.
I would say the tools that are the backbone that allow you to deploy inventory to these different channels and to understand what your costs are going into it, right? Like those are the main data points. Let's set aside that to be great, you have to build a great product or great products. Like that's obvious. Hopefully everyone here is seeking to do that. To scale that greatness, like you need some kind of system in place that is reliable around 2 things: inventory availability and inventory costing. If you can get those right, you can make a lot of decisions better, right? If you can pull that data out and your team can, your marketer, your inventory planner, your finance person can go find that information for themselves instead of constantly pinging the production and ops person on Slack, like, hey, where is this? Or, hey, what did this cost? You're just gonna speed up decision making. And so I think, any kind of software that accomplishes that for you is gonna set you up well. And then it's going to feed really well into these, like, probably a handful of winning planning tools that are being built right now that are going to go miles deep with AI. But they still need that data of like what inventory is available and when to actually be able to recommend the right decisions.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I learned a lot from this panel, so I'm happy to be up here. I think we maybe have time for one question. No questions. Okay, sorry. Moving on. Hopefully we answered everything already then. But find our panelists afterwards if you have questions for them.